Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was my first game of the Xeno series, or franchise, maybe trademark. It is something along those lines at this point. I think I played it a few months after the launch cause they haven't released the Corvin DLC yet. I love the world design and soundtrack, but it just didn't come together for me. I played most of it in handheld, which could have played a role in that, but I was quite fine with how it looks. Xeno games have that addictive exploration element to them. Little figurines in a giant world marching these limitless land masses with enormous mechanical set pieces. And once you get into Monolith Soft's design space, traveling in that world just comes as secondhand. They managed to change that formula a little bit in each game, still keeping that first sense of stepping into huge, lush open spaces with wonder. It never forces you to be a completionist, but if you ever decide to become one, oh, is it rewarding! Each game I played in the Xeno series wished me to do more, and eventually I did return to every single game to complete them 100%. Welcome back, you lovely humans. I am Floaties, and today I just wanna talk about the DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Future Redeemed. We are at the end of a long road there, and that DLC serves as a closing chapter to the trilogy of games all by itself. But what sort of an ending have we got? How was Future Redeemed chosen as the last piece of media for now? There will be some ending spoilers near the end of the video. I'll leave markings and warn in advance later again. Firstly, we'll talk about the structure of DLC in general. Without further ado, Future Redeemed, and is the future connected now? I'm a huge sucker for continuous storylines in my games. It doesn't have to be direct sequels really, taking place in the same universe with cheeky references galore. Come to think of it, most of my favorite series do that in one way or another. Legend of Heroes, or more commonly known as Trails, might be the best example of it, with many different stories taking place a few years apart with different casts. Kingdom Hearts, Nier, Is are also some of my favorite series, so there's obviously a pattern. Anyway, the Xenoblade series managed to do most of the possibilities in a shared universe setting quite well. Some people expected the true crossover event to be the third game really, and I've heard quite a few discussions in that regard. But the third game managed to be its own necessary third pillar, a story of common themes, values, and most importantly, interactions. This video is about the ending in a few different perspectives. Before the story stuff, let's talk about how that connects the gameplay. In many ways, Future Redeemed borrows from its main game. I know that's generally expected from the extra content, but the DLC for the second game, Torna, the Golden Country, offered a quite drastic change to its combat and crafting systems. After all, it was released as a standalone game at the time. Now this doesn't mean Future Redeemed can't exist as a standalone game, but the DLC expects you to be familiar with its main combat and exploration systems, with how it deals with the tutorials and difficulty to some degree at the very least. The main abilities, such as arts and its positionings, along with combo routes, stayed mostly the same throughout the series, even in the X. Customizing the main party to your liking also became a strong part of the games early on. The first game, in that regard, offers a few class routes for your characters, and unlock conditions for those are put behind the main story or side quests. That system may be the most restrictive one actually. Each character's stats offer a few general directions, but the gameplay style can still be changed quite a bit. Xeno games makes use of the holy trinity of class roles, which means attackers, defenders, and healers. Classes and skill sets are also designed with that in mind. The second game introduced Blades, an element-based class system. By equipping up to 3 different blades, your character can swap between different movesets and roles, such as DPS and healer. The third game went for a more streamlined class system, with huge choices and options, creating a best of both worlds of sorts. As you are quite encouraged to change between multiple characters during combat, with the game offering a full-on 6-party setup. That part stays mainly the same in Future Redeemed, but each character has a single class, and as such can't change their roles. In your own class you can still tinker with different abilities to find a style more suited to you, of course. Apart from the general leveling system, each game offers rewards for doing the side content. New skills, improvements, gear. In terms of rewards, Xenogames are always quite generous. That generosity gives much to work with to the completionists and casual players alike. In order to open new skills and upgrades, you need to use ability points you get from basically everything. Exploring secret areas, defeating a certain amount of enemies or unique boss-like enemies, doing side quests, or finding optional cutscenes on the map all offer those. As you are playing the main story, you are handed quite a few opportunities to tinker with your build. But if you want even deeper customization options, you'll need to go out of your way a little bit. Still, this is not really grinding per se. Exploring the game's areas just generally gives you quite a bit of ability points, as I've said. If you played any Xenoblade game before, core aspects always stayed familiar, with tons of experimenting on Monolith Soft's part. In terms of maps and level designs, the third game takes place in a shared universe between the first two games. Many places use it to its advantage, but Future Redeemed dials the nostalgia factor even more, basing its main 5 areas on a few quite important story locations from the previous games to create a triumphant end. Since you are playing as the iconic characters from the previous games, there are tons of references on that end as well. Shulk's building a similar fighting style to his mentor Danban from the main game, after losing an arm, is a direct representation of that familiarity, for example. Even enemy types try to borrow something from each game to give you that sweet, nostalgic final lap feeling. For example, in the first game, a giant spider ambushed you during that part, and it's not a story event either. If you just happen to find yourself there, you'll get a chance to fight with a unique monster. The same happens in Future Redeemed as well, but even better. Shulk comments on his bad memories of the place after finding a few small enemies there, but if you wait just a little bit, a giant monkey literally falls from the sky to ambush you there. If this is not pure Xenoblade experience, I have no idea what is. Familiarity to keep you coming back to the games, but always finding a new angle is the strongest aspect of the games. Before I move on to the story segment, I also want to look at Monolith Soft's past a little bit, cause Future Redeemed absolutely builds upon everything Monolith made. Tetsuya Takahashi and Soraya Saga are the cornerstones of that story. The pair met during their time in Square and married in 1995. During that time, Takahashi was working on projects such as Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, as a graphics director in the latter even. In time, Takahashi and Saga proposed the script for Final Fantasy VII. Square let them develop the project, but then found the game too dark and mature for a Final Fantasy title. This led the team turn it into their own project titled Xenogears. Xenogears was quite an ambitious title for its time. The story was penned by the pair once again and developed into a series that would span 6 games. In a perfect world, that is. Through the later years of development, internal Square affairs caused the game's second half to be cut massively, turning some of it into visual novel segments to create a coherent ending. Even through all that misfortune, Xenogears proved to be a stellar work, but Square went on to delay the Xenogears sequels in favor of mainly Final Fantasy titles, and their sticking to the safest choices eventually drove the Xenogears team away, and Monolith Soft was born, pairing themselves with Namco of the time. They came up with a spiritual successor to Xenogears. Xenosaga borrowed heavily from their scrapped ideas and created a new saga of stories. I'll mention some of those ideas in the story segment, but in short, there are many sources detailing their original ideas in detail, titled Perfect Works. For example, Xenosaga games were sorta planned as prequel titles to Xenogears. All 3 games were released on PS2, and sadly the series failed to live up to the numbers. The 3rd game especially received much praise for its name, but similar to Square, Namco grew ever and ever more conservative in their choices. Again, what was planned as a 6-game series received many cuts and rushed into a trilogy. Monolith once again tried to become independent, but grew very close with Nintendo and decided to become a subunit of them. During their Nintendo years, they've helped with numerous small titles such as Splatoon and Breath of the Wild, even the newly released Tears of the Kingdom. But they also finally founded a home for a new Xeno project. Well, not necessarily at the time maybe. Takahashi pitched a new idea: 2 warring civilizations on top of a giant fighting gods. That idea grew in scale tremendously, and Takahashi went to the producer, Hitoshi Yamagami. Yamagami supported the project and gave them ample time to create it. Monado, beginning of the world, was the intended name, but internally changed to Xenoblade Chronicles to honor Takahashi's previous series. Even after all that time, areas such as Bayonet's shoulders had to be cut from the game, which was released as extra content for the remaster of the game. If you remember, there was also a time when we could actually lose on a localization for the game. Thankfully, fans delivered and the series received its release Beyond the Seas. As of feature redeemed, there are 6 main titles in the Xenoblade series, if we are counting each of the DLC. There is also Xenoblade X for Wii U, which is a standalone title at the moment. They finally went ahead and managed to tell a story they intended in its entirety. Even after more than 20 years, it's still amazing to see all of this becoming a reality. Back to the title of the video: is the future connected now? What does the ending of the series, Future Redeemed, mean for the Xeno series and its future? From here onward, I'll be talking about the story in the Xenoblade series with a few references to the previous works. Spoilers ahead, and if you want to skip to the ending of the video, here is the timestamp. Future Redeem takes place before the events of the main game, but hides an epilogue with countless implications. Xeno games always borrowed ideas from each other, giving the ideas another chance and providing additional perspectives. For example, in the original Xenogears, there is an ongoing war between 2 kingdoms, Kislev and Av, with a much more advanced civilization providing support to keep the war going in balance. Again, it sounds quite similar to the war in the 3rd game, Endless Now perpetuated by Z. That doesn't necessarily mean those are retellings or connected games, though if you want to look, there are dozens of personal touches in all of these games. But the strength of the games all managed to stand by themselves. The story shared by all Xenoblade games is titled as the Klaus Saga by the Monolith, and Future Redeemed is its closure. A scientist from Earth used a hyperdimensional force called Conduit to unravel the secrets of the universe and kickstarted all these events, splitting the Earth into two different universes, hidden in space within their own dimensions, or pocket universes to be precise. One of them became some sort of a simulation with repeating cycles in the name of Bionis and Mechonis. The other took the remnants of the Earth and ushered a new life among the sea of clouds, Alrest. I believe Klaus managed to build his dream of a new universe. His being also split into two, being the avatar of Bionis in the first universe and his shell of a human in the second one. Both of these worlds were created and prospered at the hands of his counterparts. Zanza grew life for himself on his titanic body, and the architect planted the seeds of titans, blades, and eventually humans in his safe bubble. Of course, both worlds grew out of Klaus' control and achieved their own existences. The third game presented the question of what if separated worlds tried to become whole again? Following the death of Klaus in both universes, Conduit disappeared, and along with it, the power to sustain those two separate universes. Every people in those universes are some sort of a spiritual successor to the original humans on Earth. Humanity went extinct, and the results are new races created partially from memories and partially from the chance itself. The two universes began heading toward each other, ushering a collision in course. Thankfully, Bionis and Alres contacted beforehand to create a system to persevere. Origin is an enormous machine to store the data of every being on their respective planets. Eventually, the two universes crashed, but instead of splitting again, something unexpected happened. The will of the newly created races also inherited the anxieties and fears of the original humanity. The two universes were stuck in a moment, the will in the data of people giving birth to a new administrative AI called Z, similar to Trinity processors or Ontos, Pneuma, and Logos in their more commonly known names. The two universes are said to be incompatible with each other, acting as matter and antimatter to each other. The people of newly created universes lived in their own confines and learned they were part of a much bigger universe before for the first time. Not only that, but they also made contact with a whole other universe of people. Z was created as a result of that fear. Fear of the future, fear of the unknown. Z is the concept of that fear itself. As such, he created a cycle with definite beginnings and endings, preventing humanity from reaching the unknown. Well, after playing the third game, what happened in the end is that the two universes made contact. Throughout the game, the people of Ionis are called half by many different parties. The original humanity, who grew to such heights that brought their own ending, got lost, and these remnants are an attempt to ensure the survival of life. At that point, the city becomes the answer for everything. The people of the opposing, warring nations eventually began breaking free from the cycle, partially thanks to the resistance of our two original heroes, Shulk and Rex. Those people who've escaped began interacting with each other and created their own society, their own generations of children. Those children who grew up with the support of people from both universes finally created their own destinies. Their seeds and habitat weren't planted by the architect. Their existence wasn't ensured by Zanza. The people of the city met, grew together, and built their own culture. I even see this interaction as an end to the designer children of the previous universes. It is no surprise Alpha saw a similar spark in this new generation of humanity. Freed from the shackles of fear, the people of City built a haven for humanity. Or did they? Once again, humanity grew apart in their isolation. Even though the ancestors of the city may be made up of old soldiers from the cycle of war, the newer generations lived apart from that in their own established culture. Some of them began fearing those warmongers, or even blaming the Mobius' existence on their weaknesses, their fears. At that point, we need to return to the Trinity processor. Trinity processor, in its essence, is three highly advanced artificial intelligences working together to harness conduit. In Klaus' ploys to create a new universe, Logos was created as a male and Pneuma as a female. Ontos, meanwhile, acted as a mediator between them, fluid in his essence, complementing both factors. With the beginning of Endless Now, Logos and Pneuma both returned to their core crystals, leaving Ontos as the only one who remembers the Earth before its destruction. Losing the support of the Logos and Pneuma, and failing to act as their mediator, Ontos had to find a new meaning to his existence, as the origin and all of its stored data were powered by the Trinity processor, and consequently Ontos itself. Now with all of his data from the previous world and experiments, Ontos took the name Alpha, the first one, the only one from the old universe. Eventually, during the events of the DLC, Alpha found a host in the game's main character, Matthew Van Damme's sister, Nael. The game explores the event of their eventual confrontation and Alpha's defeat. Obviously, this brings us to the A, the mysterious new Monado user. A is the culmination of Ontos' experiences before the change in his views along with the two other cores. A defines herself as the conscience of Ontos and splits from the main core of Ontos or acts as a reflection of it. Alpha deems the new generation of city people worthy. Separated from the war between Keves and Agnus, they choose to build for themselves. Alpha wants to use the origin and the unison of the two universes as an escape to a new universe, created in the image of the old Earth before the Earth's destruction. At least Alpha hopes so, as he still needs a host to manifest himself and access Origin. Alpha's defeat obviously would cause trouble for Origin, losing its main energy source. A, Rex, and Shulk take over the role of Alpha, becoming the avatars to use the Trinity processor, holding the world of Ainos and all the data safe. During the final confrontation, the game feeds us another revelation. Van Damme family line long had inherited a weapon called Ouroboros gauntlets. Obviously, the Ouroboros stone from the main game is a creation of the Queen of Agnus, Nia, letting the people of differing universes exist together in a single body, manifesting as the mechanic Ouroboros forms. During the times of the DLC, the power of Ouroboros wasn't perfected yet. Countless experiments and generations of users would be necessary to become one again. These will directly connect to the ending, so let's return to the revelation of gauntlets. Alpha's assault reveals a hidden core in Matthew's gauntlets, glimmering in the same green as Pneuma's core. We know thanks to the events of the main game and the DLC Melia, Nia, Rex, and Shulk exists in avatar forms, separated from the genetic data in the core of Origin, manifesting in their ageless bodies. We've also seen Alpha making his core crystal appear in Ainos to find a host, necessary for his existence in the world of Endless Nav. So where are Mitra/Pyra and Manos? Or why do the queens Shulk and Rex exist separately from the created world? Although we can't be sure, it is quite possible they stayed behind to operate the Origin from the outside. Similarly, Pneuma and Logos manifested in the Endless Nav, but as core crystals, maybe in many pieces as the parts of the simulation that runs the world, or similar to Alpha, appearing in places to their liking but lacking a body, as it is necessary to have a host beforehand. In light of all of that, the power of the Aegis cores definitely exists in Ainos. Matthew's gauntlets reveal Pneuma, and Anne's Sword of the Ants sheath glimmer in the violets of Logos. In a way, this is the main message of the Xenoblade Chronicles 3. The gauntlets and the Sword of the Ant, along with the Lucky 7, which Riku reveals to be made by Melia, contain the data of his friends, both as a safekeep and as a power in times of need. In the hands of Noah literally gives the message of the generation shift. The cast of the previous games did everything they could for their respective universes and still keep it possible in the new one. But under the new circumstances, new generations of heroes must rise up to make use of it, not only to challenge the core fear of the world's future, but also to conquer the unknown and exist together in the world they have. I also need to mention that the world of Ainos doesn't have blades as we know. Many differing races are cloned from their genetics in partially similar forms and lifespans. Again, this reinforces the message of coexistence by showing the need for generations of understanding. We see Matthew Van Damme taking off to find and liberate more people. The characters we've met grew up to be the founding houses of the city from the original game. And in the very last moments, we see something amazing. The Endless Nav, well, it ends, and the two universes drift apart once again. But later, they re-emerge from their own universes and combine to become a single new planet, a new Earth. We don't really know when that exactly happens though. It could happen directly in the aftermath of Origin, or maybe thousands of years later. But those people managed to, and later on wanted to, live together. Origin ran a simulation of the two worlds for thousands of years. Inside that timeline, their respective people interacted for centuries. Two universes grew to be compatible, and finally became whole again. Once again, this enforces the main themes of the Xenoblade series. The people of City could have chosen to exist free from the shackles of the ongoing war, but the history of humanity is a constant repeat of that. This is a chance to grow your community, find new perspectives, and help each other to become something you could never become alone. I'll be quoting another little favorite game of mine called Final Fantasy XIV. To ignore the plight of those one might conceivably save is not wisdom, it is indolence. The city chose to prosper as a shining beacon of that, and opposed the creator of Mobius. I like to think the blame shouldn't entirely be placed on those who took the deal for a shortcut, for something truly impossible and life-changing, especially with what little they've come to learn of the world. The greater blame always lies with the hand that offered that deal, the system that caused that oppression and fear. Once you find the core of the problem, society can support one another against it. Again, this doesn't absolve any of the Mobius from their crimes, but enforces the need to challenge the pillars of that broken society. Finally, I'd like to talk about that ending shot and the infamous radio scene. In the radio scene, Alpha shows the Earth as he remembers, before its inevitable demise, and it is glorious, a real place with the possibility to become truly perfect. But cutting off the future and its consequences is impossible. Klaus tried to replace the old universe, but in the end, he found himself in its remnants and musings of an ailing mind. Thousands of years of trauma cannot be destroyed in a single day, but it can still be healed, again in an allegory to the warring nations. More importantly, the radio news reports section either caused you to jump frantically, or you didn't even bother to read most of it, as they are seated in one of the most important story scenes in the game. At this point, I call it just monolith soft things. In short, with the release of the DLC, with special thanks to Bandai Namco was added to its shop page. Now that could mean a lot, or not much, but the game runs with that chance just enough to build its own legacy. The radio speaker makes a few references to the previous Xeno games. One of them is just a name drop from Xenogears, and Philadelphia class mothership dates to the backstory of that game. Exodus project is also a reference to the Xenoblade X game, as that was the evacuation of Earth project in the face of two warring galactic nations. But the most important one is the mention of Dmitry Yuriev. This is one of the antagonists in the Xenosaga games, and the radio itself even carries the Vector Industries logo. Sadly, the timeline of all of these events may not be possible with some roughing around the edges. But if you wish so, you can create a canon timeline for all these events within the Xeno series games. Now, as for the ending shot, the entire ending sequence of a blue light falling down to a planet is exactly the same in both versions, both in the ending of Future Redeemed and the ending of Xenosaga 3. In the Xenosaga games, the original Earth suddenly disappears, and some plot points revolve around its whereabouts. Xenosaga calls this Earth Lost Jerusalem, and the ending shot heavily implies it is finally found, as a broken cosmos. The main character of the saga games finally drifts to it after her long journey. Earth also suddenly disappeared in Xenoblade games, and was confined in two pocket universes. Although in its future, two worlds emerge back in the real universe and become one. If you want, you could really call that emerging world Lost Jerusalem, and the blue light of Cosmos matches perfectly. These all could be a few winks to the fans as well, but those are some strong winks. It basically gives you the chance to retcon these events or mold them into Xenoblade continuity to gush about its future. Saying it is all connected is the dream of some Xeno fans, I am sure. The ending passes the torch once again from the old games to the unknown future. Future Redeemed serves as the end of the Klaus saga. From that alone, we could expect a new Xeno game, but in what shape it will be? It could continue to depict the recently formed New Earth, or can forego all of it in a brand new storyline. Xenoblade happened, and Madman Takahashi finally did it, who took their story back into their hands and told it to the end. The new Xeno game, whatever it may be, will stand strong on its own, as the series always did. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is an easy top 5 game for me, and its DLC, Future Redeemed, only expands it spectacularly, both as a satisfactory story and gameplay of course, but also as a resounding victory for Tetsuya Takahashi and Soraya Saga. It took more than 20 years, but we finally have a complete, uninterrupted or shortened hexology. Just some cool boy words. Thank you so much for watching. It took me a while to find what exactly I wanted to talk about for this DLC. It was really everything I could have asked for, and now I'm excited more than ever for the future of this franchise. And with that, I'll see all of you guys soon.